Good afternoon. Thank you for being with us. I am proud to stand alongside fellow members of Congress who recognize the urgency of the economic situation that we are facing across our local communities and our entire country. And that issue is inflation. And so we are here to urge the House to pass Lower Food and Fuel Costs Act to lower gas prices and to lower grocery costs. And those of us who are standing on stage today have a job, and our job is to listen to the people that we represent and then respond with legislation that can help solve the problems of the people we represent. And certainly when I travel across central Virginia, in my district, I hear about the tough financial decisions that people are making. I hear about the challenges facing our farmers, our producers, our families across the district. And we know that inflation, consolidation across many industries, and supply chain challenges continue to impact America's families, America's businesses, and America's seniors. We hear it every day. So this package, the Lower Food and Fuel Costs Act, came out of policy discussions in both parties and from members coming from the corners of the country, from Virginia to Iowa to California, Minnesota, New Jersey, New Hampshire, across the board. Inflation requires a response, and so I want to give thanks to the lawmakers in both parties who've worked on the legislation within this package, on the individual provisions, who helped draft a roadmap for our response. This bill is not about scoring political points. It's about trying to bring down the cost of living for the American people and putting our ideas on the table. That's a goal that members of Congress should get behind, and we urge our colleagues to recognize the merits of the targeted and bipartisan provisions in this package. Hyperpartisanship does nothing to actually respond to inflation, make gas cheaper, or make sure food is in the fridge at an affordable price. So I want to begin by thanking Congresswoman Axne. Thank you for being here today. And I want to thank her for her focus on expanding access to biofuels, lowering gas prices for the American people, and reducing our dependence on foreign oil. With the administration now waiving the summer restriction on E15 sales, we need to find ways to respond to increased ethanol demand. I want to thank Congressman Harder for his work to lower fertilizer prices for America's producers. The rising cost of fertilizer is one I continue to hear about from Virginia's ag industry, and it is having a downstream impact on consumers at the grocery store. When farmers pay more, all Americans pay more. I also want to thank Congresswoman Hinson for her leadership and focus on building out the EQIP program. And as chair of Conservation and Forestry, the subcommittee on the larger Ag Committee, I appreciate her legislation, which recognizes that a successful but oversubscribed program like EQIP can be expanded to help farmers embrace voluntary conservation practices, deploy precision agriculture techniques, combat droughts like those that we are seeing across the western United States. Also want to highlight Congresswoman Craig for her work on promoting year-round E15, as well as her legislation to identify bottlenecks in our ag supply chain. I'm proud to see two provisions that I championed on behalf of the American livestock producers in this legislation, both the Bipartisan Butcher Block Act and the Bipartisan Meat and Poultry Special Investigator Act. I thank Congressman Dusty Johnson, for his partnership in the Butcher Block Act. In my district, livestock and poultry brings in millions of dollars for Virginia producers each year. But consolidation is threatening the viability of our smaller cattle processors. And our Butcher Block Act is common sense. It's a common sense step towards allowing American processors the ability to expand their operations, launch new businesses, and just make sure they're keeping up with the big guys. The Special Investigator Bill, it's a way for us to go after the anti-competitive practices within the meat industry that are driving up prices for consumers and boxing out family farmers. That's why I'm encouraged that this package includes the Bipartisan Meat and Poultry Special Investigators Act. And in recent weeks, I've received lots of questions about this legislation, why it's important, and right now at this moment. The idea for this bill wasn't crafted in Washington, D.C. It's an idea that's been derived from the concerns and expectations of America's small livestock producers. It's an idea that's been around for more than 100 years, since the Packers and Stockyards Act was first put in place. But now with the Meat and Poultry Special Investigator Act, we have the opportunity to finally make sure that we are enforcing our antitrust laws, particularly in this space. And so the Meat and Poultry Special Investigator Act would establish a referee in the meat industry, someone who can blow the whistle on unfair and illegal practices, and this bill should not be controversial. The larger package that we're here to discuss today has broad bipartisan support. and I'm so excited that we are here to talk about it. The spirit of this bill, the Lower Food and Fuel Costs Act, is about listening to our constituents. It's about being responsive to the challenges that the people we serve are facing. They want us to lower costs at the grocery store, particularly meat prices. They want us to lower gas prices and make biofuels more available. They want us to prevent future food shortages, and they want us to be responsive to their needs. That's what we are working to do, and I'm going to open it up to my colleagues to make remarks. I would now like to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Congresswoman Cindy Axne of Iowa.
Thank you, Representative Spanberger. Good afternoon.
Good job, Abigail, by the way.
Yes, thank you. Leave it to Gottheimer to shock me the minute I get up here.
Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for turning out to learn about how we're going to lower the costs at the pump and at the grocery store for Americans across this country. I want to thank Congresswoman Spanberger and my colleagues today for all of the incredible leadership and work that's been done to make this happen. And just like Representative Spanberger, every single day when I'm in district, I'm hearing from my constituents that they're having a rough time making ends meet. They're crushed at the grocery store checkout lines, and the pumps are at the all-time high. We know the prices are really gouging folks right now. Families in Iowa and across the country need our help now, right now. And that's why it's critical that we pass our bill, the Lower Food and Fuel Costs Act, and we're going to make that happen. This bill will address many things, and Representative Spanberger touched on some of those, but will address the rise in fertilizer prices for farmers by building out more domestic production, something we need here, and giving the USDA more resources to help farmers reduce their input needs. This way, when they reduce their input needs, they're producing food for lower cost, and therefore that can translate to lower cost in the grocery store aisles. It will increase competition in the meat packing industry, which has long been dominated by the Big Four, taking over 80% of the industry. That has resulted, unfortunately, in lack of transparency and fairness in the market. And so this increased enforcement that Representative Spanberger just talked about and looking at those anti-competitive practices will restore integrity in the market and lower prices at the store. This bill also corrects an outdated law and makes E15 available year-round, something I've been pushing for since literally I walked in the halls of Congress a few years ago. This homegrown fuel is produced right in my home state. I'm hearing some laughter because they've all heard me talk about it literally nonstop. And we know that when we push this product out to folks, it's significantly cheaper, anywhere from 20 to 40 cents per gallon. That's going to save a lot of money for a lot of families this summer as we move towards implementing this. And so we are helping not just reduce our carbon emissions and also helping our agriculture communities. We are literally putting money in people's pockets because they're saving. So to help make sure that more families have access to this more affordable fuel, the Lower Food and Fuels Costs Act also includes my legislation to expand the infrastructure across our country, making the availability of E15 more readily available. So we've got a lot of work to do, but the American people can't wait any longer as prices continue to skyrocket and their dollars are stretched just far too thin. So let's pass the Lower Food and Fuel Costs Act because that's the action that they need. It's the action that Americans deserve, and it's the action that we have to deliver. Thank you so much.
Excellent.
I'm now going to welcome up Representative Josh Gottheimer, who just a moment ago took issue with the fact that on the paper it says he has 1 to 2 minutes. So, Mr. Gottheimer, I welcome you to speak for as long as you'd like.
Mine will be 2 minutes. Thank you, Ms. Spanberger. Thank you for your phenomenal leadership. Across the country, including in North Jersey, Americans are facing skyrocketing food and gas prices, as we all know. Between COVID, stretched supply chains impacting the global market, the war in Ukraine and its impact on the food supply and oil prices, and monopolistic price gouging, especially in the meat and chicken supply, costs are through the roof. And the rise in input costs like gas has led to higher costs of doing business. In fact, nearly a third of production costs are energy related. This isn't good for business, and it certainly isn't good for families that we represent. To my colleagues who would rather do the blame game upstairs and spend all the day tweeting and spend all night screaming on cable news, if you're not going to be part of the solution, then please stop pointing fingers. We need bipartisan action now, and we're going to do that by working together. And I want to thank everybody who's here for working really hard to make this happen. That's why tomorrow we'll be voting for bipartisan legislation that will help lower the costs of families' grocery bills, tackle rising costs in the supply chain crisis, and take action against meat or poultry companies that are colluding and making insane profits on the backs of our hardworking middle-class families. Could you imagine what kind of person, and I can't imagine this, who would jack up the price of food on our families under this idea that they can get together in some back room and figure out a way to screw people over? Moms and dads are just trying to feed their kids and having their hard-earned dollars stolen. It makes all of us sick. Listen, I'm a capitalist, and one of the core views of any capitalist is competition. Monopolists that collude to corner a market aren't capitalists, they're crooks. This new legislation builds on my affordability agenda for Jersey to address our supply chain, boost competition in the food industry, increase domestic production and manufacturing, and take an all-the-above approach to energy. We need to get domestic capacity up and gas prices down, reduce our dependence on foreign producers, and achieve our longer-term climate objectives. And I'm calling on the President to sit down with domestic oil and gas companies and find a way forward to lower prices. Having Energy Secretary Granholm meet with oil companies is a good step, but it's not enough. We need the President to bring everyone together. This has got to be a top priority, just like taking on the colluders in the poultry and meat sectors. And the Problem Solvers Caucus has been working on this issue. Abigail has done a phenomenal job leading and bringing these issues to the forefront, and I want to thank her again for her leadership. I'm looking forward to getting this legislation out of the House and over to the Senate. Democrats and Republicans is an issue we work together on. Here in the greatest country in the world, if we work together, there's no reason why our best days won't always be ahead of us. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gottheimer. I now recognize Mr. Pappas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Congresswoman Spanberger for your leadership and all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle who have provisions in this legislation. This represents a set of steps that helps us meet the moment, and it's part of a continued effort in Congress to make sure we're doing all we can to lower costs for the American people who are counting on us. Now, there's no more pressing priority than lowering the cost of fuel, than lowering the cost of groceries. And that's why this legislation is something that we've got to move forward on a bipartisan basis. I talk with constituents each and every day in New Hampshire who are feeling the pinch right now. And we know that this inflation is unsustainable for our families, for our small businesses, for our farmers, and for our economy. So we in Congress need to do all we can on a bipartisan basis. My office has been fielding a number of calls, as I'm sure my colleagues have been hearing from their own constituents. I heard from a family today who paid $350 at the grocery store on a single trip just for the basic necessities. I've talked to some seniors who are on fixed incomes who worry about being able to afford their medications in addition to their groceries, in addition to their other bills. So these are the people that are relying on us that we're here to represent. And by taking steps forward on these common sense ideas to lower food costs and fuel costs, we can help provide the kind of relief that our constituents are counting on. And I also add, as chair of the Small Business Caucus in Congress, this is an issue that has reverberations across our economy, and the pain is felt in particular by our small businesses on Main Street. We've got a lot of seasonal businesses in New Hampshire. They are working harder than ever. They're working longer hours than ever before, but their profit margins aren't showing it because they're paying the same cost that each and every one of us are experiencing, and they can't just continue to pass that on to consumers. They don't operate like an oil and gas company does. They don't operate like one of these big conglomerates do. And so we've got to make sure that there's fairness in our economy, that our families can pay the bills, and that our small businesses, as they continue to recover from a really tough couple of years, can make it and can keep their doors open and keep doing what they do best. So this is about getting it right for the American people. This is one of many steps that we've got to continue to take. We have to sustain this effort to address rising prices and fuel costs in this country. And let's have all the good ideas out on the table from both parties. Let's see what's going to work, what's going to make a difference, because at the end of the day, it's about getting it right for the people that we serve. Thank you.
Now I'd like to welcome Representative Annie Kuster up, also from New Hampshire.
Thank you, the whole delegation. Thank you, Abigail, for bringing us together, and Cindy and Josh and all of you that have parts of this bill. It's really important. You know, one thing about going home every weekend is that we're in the grocery store, we're in the gas station. $4.04 for a gallon of milk this weekend and $4.98 for a gallon of gas. Chris mentioned our small businesses. 90% of the jobs in New Hampshire are from small businesses, and we're headed into the most important season for us after the ski season is the summer on the lakes and on the ocean, and we've got a lot of tourist businesses, small restaurants, attractions, hotels that are really struggling with the high costs. So we hear about it every visit. Gas and food prices are rising, and I want to thank the leadership of this group because it's bipartisan, and bringing legislation together that's bipartisan to lower food and fuel costs is what's going to make the difference. We can get it passed in the House, we can get it passed in the Senate, we can get it to the president. You know, the food sector in particular, I serve on ag in addition to energy and commerce, has faced unparalleled challenges, particularly with regard to supply chain in the aftermath of COVID-19. I remember the meetings that we were having about the food processing and the impact of COVID-19 on food processing. And then the progress that we made getting back from COVID was further complicated by Putin's horrific invasion in Ukraine. So I'm proud to stand with my colleagues. We've got to bring down costs, and this legislation is comprehensive, tackling fertilizers, the consolidation in the meat processing industry, you've heard quite a bit about that, and supply chain bottlenecks. These are decisive steps that we can take, and we need to pass this package and get it to the Senate so the president can sign it into law. So thanks for bringing us together.
And now welcome Representative Dean Phillips of Minnesota.
Thank you, Abigail. Representation begins with listening. That's what we do here. We travel home just about every week or every other week. We spend time with constituents, with small business owners, our communities, and we listen. And we bring back what we hear and we try to convert that to action. That's what this is about. I hope we take it. I hope we take action tomorrow. And it doesn't matter whether you're red or blue, it doesn't matter what part of the country you come from. There are 428 other members of the House upstairs who are hearing the same thing. There are 100 senators hearing the exact same thing. Rising costs are affecting everybody. But to get anything done in this institution requires cooperation. Our founders intended to make change and progress awfully difficult, and it works a little bit too well. But we need help. And I'm not ashamed to say we need to extend invitations to our Republican colleagues who have been on television every night and on Twitter and on social media complaining about inflation. That's fair. What's not fair is to do nothing about it. That's my invitation to my colleagues, my friends, who probably have some good ideas. I ask them to share them. We have a responsibility that transcends politics in this institution, and I hope we get to it and show the country during one of the most anxiety-ridden, fearful times in our modern history that we can work together to help people. We can't fail. There's a sense of urgency. You see it with my colleagues behind me. I want to thank those that put so much effort into this bill by converting listening to action. That's what we're here for, and I sure as heck hope we get it done. Thanks.
Susie Lee of Nevada.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. I want to thank Abigail Spanberger for leading this bill, as well as all of my colleagues here. You probably wonder why a congresswoman from Las Vegas, Nevada is up here with this group of members representing pretty agricultural states in our country. And the reason is because the people in my district in Las Vegas have really been at the forefront of the economic devastation caused by COVID. 2 years ago, we had a 34% unemployment rate. Today, it is 5%. We now have the second highest gas prices in the country, and people are struggling to put food on their table. They have felt like they, with our work that we pushed through with the American Rescue Plan, Nevada has seen an economic comeback, but families are still struggling, and that's really what this bill is about. And not only that, I'm joining this group of members who really represent some of the most bipartisan members of Congress. And it's really important at this time, as both Josh and Dean have alluded to, that we come together and we put politics aside and we work together to really solve this problem, which I call the final gut punch of COVID-19, with the disruption in our global supply chain, with the war in Ukraine. we just simply cannot catch a break. And that's when Congress should get to work. And so this bill will not only reduce food costs through reducing fertilizer costs, but also will reduce the cost at the fuel pump. And this is just what we're going to do this week. Let's not forget what we've already done. This past week, we just voted to crack down on exorbitant ocean shipping costs. We've also voted to crack down on price gouging by oil and gas companies. We voted to bring down the cost of prescription drugs by allowing Medicare to negotiate. Also by capping the cost of insulin to $35 a month. And we voted to pass the America Competes Act. So we have gotten to work, and we do call on our Republican colleagues to join us. We see that our families are suffering, and that's why I'm proud to support this bill. I urge all members to support this bill, and let's get together and get something passed and onto the president's desk so we can show the American people that we do hear them, but not more importantly, that we can work together and we can produce solutions that improve their lives. So thank you.
Excellent.
All right. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
My question is about the biofuels provisions in this package. We've heard some environmentally minded Democrats have criticized the package for containing provisions for biofuel, which is not necessarily viewed as a clean energy. How do you respond to concerns that this is a step back from Democrats' clean energy agenda?
Well, I respond by saying it's absolutely a foot forward in our agenda for clean energy, and it supports the administration's approach to clean biofuels. And we're talking about a fuel that literally reuses every gallon of water. It takes 1 gallon of production of water to produce 1 gallon of ethanol, which is very different from a fossil fuel. It takes a lot more gallons of water. We reuse every bit of water related to that. We're capturing carbon as it's going through there and using it for opportunities. We can, our farmers can bury carbon, but we can also capture it in facilities and then sell it for cold, use for cold storage. There's so much that we're working on when it comes to biofuels, and whether it's soy or corn in Iowa. It can also be switchgrass down in Arizona or New Mexico, or white pine in the Carolinas. So we really need to be thoughtful about the use of biofuels as an opportunity for our energy here. I would say that I think that as somebody who's known this industry for a long time, I was a division administrator at the Department of Natural Resources. I ran the state's energy and environment plan in the state of Iowa, and I've talked to a lot of my colleagues. They don't understand the production, how it's changed from the beginning, and that's something that I've been trying to educate them on. What I can tell you right now is that we are going to hopefully have the votes tomorrow to move forward the president's agenda to open up E15 in the summertime and make sure that we can get that out to Americans so that we can lower their cost at the pump by up to 40 cents a gallon. And that's what's so important right now, making sure that we're lowering the cost at the pump for American families, while at the same time creating national security here by production of our own fuel, and absolutely addressing the issues of climate change because we are lowering the carbon emissions because of E15. So I'm going to continue to push a product that I know is actually meeting those climate agendas, and I'm happy to see this bill come to the floor.
Yeah, the Fed obviously raising interest rates really aggressively. There are a lot of concerns that we're headed towards a recession. Are any of you concerned that we might be headed towards a recession and that this package is too little, too late?
I can try to take that. We should always be concerned that we might be heading into recession. I think it's they added 750 or 75 basis points, I think, to the rate today, which is a huge jump, first largest one since 1994. It's designed to cool the economy a little bit. The irony of all this is we have a red-hot economy still. We have 2 jobs open for everybody seeking one, but that doesn't matter when costs are exceeding wage increases. We recognize that. This is one of the only levers. First of all, there is no easy way to do this. It's the most appropriate lever to pull. There may be more forthcoming, but have to cool the economy to hopefully reduce inflation. The better news is we just heard from a bank CEO this week who was reflecting on the fact that savings accounts in this country, the savings rate has gone up significantly during COVID. People have saved a lot of money. We are in a better position now than we certainly were in the last recession, and a much better position than the 1970s to weather this in a way that a lot of other countries are not prepared. So yes, we're worried. And prospectively, we'll be watching it closely and paying close attention to it. This bill, does it solve everything? Absolutely not. Is it a beginning? Absolutely. Have I seen a proposal from the other side of the aisle that can address cost issues right now? No. A lot of complaining. But yes, we're mindful of a recession. Our job is to try to find policies that will mitigate the effects of these rate increases and hopefully get us through this where the economy cools but doesn't go into recession. That's our obligation. If I might say one more thing about energy, I think this is important. I think I speak for all of us. We Democrats, want to see more energy production in the near term. Long term, yeah, we think we should convert. We shouldn't be reliant, as a national security issue, be reliant on our adversaries. We're seeing that right now. Near term, yes, we'd like to see more production. We wish oil companies, frankly, would produce a little bit more now and do anything they can to reduce the cost of fuel in this country. Long term, do we want to see a conversion? Absolutely. But I just want to dissuade those in this country that might think that somehow we are standing in the way of that. We're asking oil companies to produce a little bit more, pump a little bit more. Will that have an effect on prices? Time will tell, but if they don't try, we sure won't know. This bill that I hope we pass is going to help a little bit. And again, it's not the end-all be-all, but we need help from our friends across the aisle on all these subjects. If we're not willing to work together, my goodness, then we fail. And our adversaries, every single damn one of them around the world, is watching us right now. Watching the complainers, watching this great experiment in democracy, and whether we can rise to the task. Whether we can rise to the task. This is our chance. And I think we will persevere, but we surely need to inspire our friends to help us.
You had mentioned you're not here to score political points, but, as primaries go on in a midterm year, this is probably inflation, gas prices, the biggest issue that voters are thinking about when they're voting. If it's not one, it's two. How confident are you that even with bipartisan support, you can convince enough people to get on board with this, even though it's such a big election issue for Republicans and Democrats alike this year?
I'll start. It's interesting. So the provisions within this legislation that I brought forth, the Butcher Block Act and the Special Investigator bill, these are bills that I've been working on for quite some time. These are bills that the Special Investigator Act, Senator Tester, Senator Grassley, lead on this, Senator Rounds in the Senate. So there's tremendous not only bipartisan support, but also bicameral support. The Butcher Block Act, I was back in my district in December of last year because I was welcoming two undersecretaries from USDA to the district because they were announcing that, in fact, the administration, Secretary Vilsack, was putting into place some provisions of the Butcher Block Act within the department, and we were there to celebrate that. So, this is something that we have been working on for quite some time, these pieces of legislation, because they matter. Certainly in my agricultural district, they matter to the livestock producers that I represent. It's why the Special Investigator bill has been endorsed by the Virginia Cattlemen's Association, by the National Cattlemen's Association. But it matters to the producers on the ground who are impacted by consolidation within the meat processing industry. It matters to producers on the ground and to rural communities that want to have local processing capacity. And it also matters to people kind of across the rest of my community, not necessarily in the agricultural areas, because we have seen the ebbs and flows within the supply chain. Certainly in the early days of COVID, when we saw processing plants shut down because of COVID, because of even cyber attacks, right? That has impacts through the supply chain. So this bill is something that we're pushing because it matters. The timeliness related to inflation, yes, but frankly, for the agricultural producers who want to see the opportunity to process their meat locally, or who want to, know that they can compete with the big guys, this has been an issue for them for a very long time, and it's been an issue of us being responsive and finally being able to build up a big enough coalition to get behind this grouping of bills that are related, and together we'll work in tandem to impact the cost of
food and fuel.
I'll tell you, it's not political. I would hazard a guess that this institution, the House and Senate, have received hundreds of thousands of communications from Americans about inflation, about how it's affecting them and their families, their inability to accommodate their food needs, their fuel needs. I would also hazard a guess that there has not been one office in this entire institution, Democrat or Republican, that has had someone call and said, please obstruct. Please make sure they can't get anything done so we can win an election this next November. And if there is one of those communications, I would sure as heck like to see it. So everything becomes political, of course, here. But Americans are suffering. We're all hearing it. We talk about it with our colleagues. You see them on TV at night. Not one American, as far as I know, has called here and said, please stand in the way of this. Please. Just the opposite. Please do something. Please do something. And we're trying. And I hope we will.
Yeah, I would just finish that up by saying, every single one of us here, we work on a very strategic focus for our districts. So none of this is new news just because, there's inflation right now. These are issues that have arisen over, in many cases, decades of bad policy making, different policy that's been put in place for businesses that, in the end, when we have something like a disruption in the market, can come back to haunt us. So it's time we fix these issues. Whether that's because we're going to help deal with inflation is one thing, and that's our number one issue that we're trying to deal with right now. But in the long term, this is going to help us fix a lot of problems. When we started with COVID and only 5% of our PPE was produced here, and doctors were reusing gloves and masks, when we get to a point where we have formula outages in our country and our children don't have formula, when we get to a point where we're locked out of getting the meat that we need in the stores and people are paying exorbitant prices because of the systems that have been created and large conglomerates that control the markets, it's time we address these issues. And so I think this package not only hits the things that we need to address right now, but puts us in a better position for the future. And that's what we're addressing in a lot of the bills that we're looking at, many out of agriculture right now, in thinking about supply chain issues. Because for the very first time, this country saw about now, 2.5, just over years ago, what happens to our supply chain when we don't manage it properly. And, I see that right in the backyards in Iowa, but what that meant was people across the country who couldn't even get what they needed in the grocery stores. So we're looking at this for short-term inflation fixes, but definitely from a long-term perspective to address the issues in our economy and our opportunities in this country for the long term.
I'll just add to that real quickly. First of all, each one of us standing up here never served in political office, elected political office prior to coming to Congress. And I don't often speak for my colleagues, but I've heard them enough on the stump to say that each one of us also came with a commitment to make sure that we make this institution work better. And when we're in our communities and we go home each and every day, and I certainly represent a community that has been through it. As I said 2 years ago, 1 in 3 of our adult workers were out of a job. And today our unemployment rate is now 5%. Every step of the way when the pandemic, and most of us served our entire career in Congress, we all came in at the same time, has literally been dealing with COVID. And this is fine, this is the ultimate result of the global supply chain of what we're seeing, not just across our country, but across the globe. And so it is our responsibility, regardless of how it plays out on the political trail, to do what we can to help the people who've elected us. And I'll venture to say that what we have done every step of the way, whether it was getting money into people's pockets, making sure that they had health care, reduced cost of health care, making sure we helped people with rental assistance, weather this pandemic, this is one more step in doing that. And that's our obligation as elected officials.
Notably, they talked about deficit reduction, spending cuts, and free trade agreements. Are any of those ideas that you're open to or are possible for common ground?
I think there's plenty of areas, and I think most of us are also members of the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus. And so, oh my goodness.
Oh, Stenny just saved her.
Where did I save her from? From the press?
I would like to thank you for joining us. We knew that Leader Hoyer was going to try and join us. He's got a busy schedule, so I appreciate you being able to make it. Just a day after your birthday, sir. Thank you for being here to celebrate with this wonderful bill. So thank you for being a champion of it.
Thank you. Well, I'll be brief because I'm sure everything's been said. But I just want to say I support that everything has been said. I want to thank Ms. Spanberger for introducing this bill. I want to thank the Ag Committee for reporting out this bill. And as so many members have played a role in putting this bill together, Cindy Axne was just leaving, Angie Craig, I understand, couldn't be here. Others, members who have played a role in this bill. I was glad to schedule this bill. It's designed at trying to bring food prices down and gasoline prices down for our consumers. We know that the pain of inflation is very pointed at this time. I go into the grocery store, I see empty shelves, indication of the supply chain interruptions that we've had. I see high prices for milk and cream and bacon. Bacon's $10 a pound plus, depending on what kind you get. And gasoline prices now in the $5 range, just devastating for working men and women in this country. And Ms. Spanberger's bill, the ag bill that we're talking about, food and fuel, is attempting to deal with that. So again, Abigail, I thank you for your efforts, and Dean Phillips and Susie Lee, who have been real fighters for this piece of legislation and for bringing prices down, because we know our people are hurting and we need to take action. I hope our Republican friends will join us in voting for this piece of legislation to try to take action to bring these prices down and make sure people have products that they need every day. My constituents, I live in a suburb outside of the rim of the District of Columbia, and my people have to drive to work, and it's cost them a lot of money. So thank you very much. I'm sorry that I was late, but I'm glad that I made it in time to say how supportive I am of this legislation.
Oh, sure.
Eric, I want to answer, I don't want to forget about your question, Mr. Brady's comments about what else we can be doing. Starting with deficit reduction. I don't have to remind all of you that the last administration added $7 trillion to the national debt. This administration is reducing the deficit, actively so. Relative to free trade, I happen to believe that we should eliminate a number of the tariffs right now that are imposing incremental costs for American consumers. Businesses in my district, individuals have been asking, as you probably saw in news reports this week, the Biden administration is considering that. Yes, so to Mr. Brady, I would ask him about the deficit reduction, but relative to free trade and reducing tariffs, I happen to be of the opinion, I think many of my colleagues as well, this would be a fine time to eliminate or reduce some of those and hopefully see those passed on to consumers, absolutely. We want ideas, that's the whole point, so I'm glad he shared one.
All right. Thank you so much for being with us today. We are down to the bare bones, so we're going to end it here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.